right. Hi. Hello, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for a second day of the conference. I am really excited to be here with John today, who as of this month is the longest serving economic secretary to the Treasury in the UK. And it's also a very exciting time to be interviewing John because as yesterday, the UK just issued its very first green bond. So I think that's the perfect place to start. In your view, how do you think the issuance went, and how do you think it went versus your expectations?
Well, I think it went very, very well. It went better than I could have expected. It's something we've been talking about in the UK for 3 years, and we successfully launched it. It was £10 billion. It was significantly oversubscribed. And I think that points to the fact that the world of green finance is opening up. Consumers, the markets are keen to find mechanisms to fund the sort of transformation we want of our economy. And so I was very pleased. It was the largest sovereign issuance that we've ever had in the world. And we managed to get a Greenium of 2.5-3 percentage points as well, which was really, base points rather, which was really, really pleasing. But I'm excited to see the broader contours of the policy debate that are going on here, and that's why I'm excited to be here in Greenwich. I've been in Boston and I'm going on to Washington to try and maximize the alignment on a global level on the standards that we expect, the reporting standards, the sorts of disclosures that we need. Because if we're going to tackle this, we've got to remove the uncertainty and aim high so that we can reach the goals that we've set ourselves for 2050 and those interim steps in between.
Yeah, I think even significantly oversubscribed might be modest. It was over 101 billion.
Well, you can say that.
Yes, of orders for a 10 billion issuance.
Yeah.
And the Greenium that you were able to achieve is the largest Greenium of a sovereign green bond issuance. So just on that, which I think I saw in this great publication called the FT,
You're familiar with them, are you?
It's going to net around 28 million in savings over the lifetime of the bonds. Yeah. So I mean, as we're seeing green bonds become more popular and we're seeing these Greeniums, how sustainable you think that discount is for issuers?
Well, it remains to be seen. I mean, we've indicated that we'll do £15 billion of issuance this year, and we'll have a budget later next month, so we'll set out some more of our plans. But the market is growing very quickly. And when I started in this job 3.5-4 years ago, it wasn't quite clear how that was going to work. And I've seen a sort of transformation over those last 3.5 years. But I think it's important that we also understand where the money is going, and we're very clear about what the purpose of this money is, because I think there's obviously a risk that unless we get these standards clear, and that's why at the G7 and the UK is co-chairing COP26, we're seeking to build a consensus, and it's been great to have the support of the US government as we try and raise the bar in terms of sustainability standards and reporting.
Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little bit more about the projects that the green bonds are going to be used to finance, sure, and maybe specifically for this audience, why US investors should care or be involved?
Well, what we did is in June, we published a green finance framework, which sets out where the money will be spent. And it will be spent on efforts to deal with our goals, which is to reduce emissions. And we've set out specific goals, 68% less by 2030, 78% less by 2035. And the sorts of projects will be those in terms of clean energy, clean transportation. We need in the UK to fund a whole network to support battery charged vehicles. But we've also looked more broadly at the issues around the effects of climate change. So looking at the transportation network, looking at the impact on our water systems as well. So we've set that out very plainly. But by, as a sovereign, issuing this bond, we're sending a signal to the market that we think that it will stimulate higher issuance. I think we saw $300 billion of issuance in green bonds overall last year. And I think we're up to 230 billion of issuance in the first half of this year alone. So that speaks to the acceleration that's going on, the appetite that's out there to find the right sort of instruments to deal with the challenges that we face.
And for the US audience?
Well, for the US, I mean, the US are integral to the financial system, and we are, I mean, the reason I'm here is because we are, you are our biggest bilateral trading partners in financial services. And you know, why I'm going to Washington is I want to look at how we can deepen the cooperation on regulatory matters. We have a very deep dialogue, US Financial Regulatory Working Group. And in that forum, we look at ways that we can make it easier to invest between our countries and between the markets. So I hope that we will be able to encourage more progress towards those defining that streamlined standards through COP26. That's what we're working for. And former Governor Carney is advising the Chancellor, who I work for. I'm his deputy for financial services, so that the US can be as aligned as possible and taking on that leadership role with us at COP to actually raise the bar on green finance.
Mm-hmm. And the $15 billion in issuance this year that you mentioned, is that $15 billion more or another? $15
billion in total, but
okay.
we will give more details as we progress. I'm responsible for the debt management office, and you can imagine we've had to issue quite a lot of debt this year, but we will give more details in due course. Yeah.
Okay, and you brought up COP26. Can you just, for those who may not be up to speed, talk a little bit more about that, and what are some of the end goals in, like what would you like to see from the financial services sector as a part of that's tied to that?
Well, I think COP26 is a key moment for the international community to express its commitment practically in terms of how it's going to help countries that are struggling to meet the climate challenge. But also, I think we need to have a consistency. We've worked in the UK on disclosures for our large asset owners in line with TCFD, making that an imperative by 2023. But what we really want to do is to ensure that we bring that clarity, bring that streamlined set of reporting standards across financial services so people understand what it means to invest in climate amelioration and what instruments actually do and what can be guaranteed that they actually contain. So the COP26 moment is about saying, do we have the ambition to prioritize this in public policy terms globally? And do we have the imagination and rigor in our standard setting to actually deliver a meaningful benchmark for green finance, which will help us move towards the targets? I mean, we know what we're aiming for. We're aiming to get to net zero. We've legislated for that in the UK. We're the first country to do that by 2050. But to do so, we're going to have to make significant investments. And we've set out those milestones. And to do that, we've got to finance it, and we've got to encourage private markets as well to follow suit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of banks, especially in the US, have come out with very ambitious climate change to try to push towards net zero. But the reality is, financial services industry that you work really closely with is a very client-driven business. So in your view, how much influence do banks really have to push that agenda?
Well, I'm passionate about financial services. I've been doing this job for quite a while. And banks and financial services institutions I regard as the foundational plumbing for the real economy. You know, they're financing the sorts of investments that are needed in new technologies and in solutions to deal with the emissions challenge and the climate crisis. So I think that financial services leading the way is really important. There are a number of initiatives, and it's good to see Janet Yellen supporting GFANZ, which is the group of 250 companies that have signed up to the sort of Glasgow Imperative, the Alliance for Net Zero. And we want more financial services firms to do that. Governor Carney has set out a new imperative today on that. But it will be important for financial institutions, banks, asset managers to take the lead, because they finance the transformation that's required to get us to net zero.
Mm-hmm. Well, in that vein, you're starting to see, well, I think JP Morgan stopped short of saying that they're no longer going to work with these types of clients. Like, do you think that's within their jurisdiction, or do you think in terms of oil financing, fossil fuels, and things like that, there should be a policy-driven response instead of a private sector response?
Well, clearly there are transition issues, and the Chancellor and I met with Jamie Dimon a couple of weeks ago in London, and there was a great enthusiasm to come to terms with the real challenges that exist. And I think we've got to be honest about that transition. We can't just press a button and flick a switch to deal with this. But what we can do is set a framework that we can be clear about and that people can aim to transition towards. And so everyone has a part to play, and the public, consumers, expect more information and more clarity over what they're investing in and what the financial institutions that they partner with are doing to deal with the climate challenge. But I think it's obviously a complex set of issues that arise in how we do this. But we mustn't both duck from those complex challenges, but also recognize that in order to get there, we've got to have meaningful milestones, which is what I think COP's about and what the sort of work I've been doing over the last few years in this space.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. And then I guess, what do you think that government entities, the US, UK, and just around the world, how would you like to see them be more collaborative in this effort?
Well, what we can't really have and what doesn't work well is when different jurisdictions pursue slightly different agendas. We want standards that are transparent, streamlined. We believe that the IFRS presents the best mechanism to give us those standards, and we look forward to working with the US, who have a place on the board to move those standards forward. I think that it's an area where there's a lot of anxiety and confusion in some respects. Some people are very anxious about the exposures that they have in the short term, but we've got to face up to that. So I think by having a deep dialogue through the COP process, through the sorts of meetings that I'll be having in Washington, we hope to explore where there are synergies, where there are ways that at a regulatory level we can align and remove the uncertainty, so that investors across a global marketplace, and let's face it, financial services isn't something that is a series of discrete markets. We transact across nations, and we want to move the frictions there so that people can understand when they invest in green, when they see disclosures that give clarity on what is happening with those underlying investments, they can have assurance around that. And I think we're making rapid progress in that domain, and I hope to see more of it in the coming weeks.
Okay, I think that's a great place to leave it. With that, I'll open it up to questions. Does anyone have up front?
Hi.
Question on how you estimated the savings. Was it comp to bonds issued the same day on the same terms, or what measure did you use to quantify?
Well, we looked at what the market conditions were very carefully. I mean, this has been several years of planning, but what we've seen is that it was related to obviously the amount of demand that we had yesterday, and that process goes on without my office, but we're very pleased with the outcome, and obviously that will determine how we look at future issuances, the scale of them, based on the volume of demand. But I remember asking questions 3 or 4 years ago of my officials in the Treasury about how this would work, and it wasn't quite clear that we would achieve that value for money. We have now achieved that, and I think that is a measure of the maturity of the market and the appetite that exists.
And for context, the 28 million savings that I cited was from BMO research analysts, so a third party.
Yeah, we don't mark our own homework.
Back there.
Good morning. It appears that in Britain and continental Europe that government intervention is a big catalyst to the green bond market in Europe. Should there be a change in political regimes or thoughts, isn't that government support of a market risk for investors?
Sorry, I didn't get the last bit of your question, sir.
I'll just quick recap. It appears that in Britain and continental Europe that government are prodding the green bond or sustainable bond market. Can we view that as government intervention? And should there be a change in political thoughts in Europe or Britain, isn't that government intervention, if it goes away, a risk for the market?
I think that there is an enduring universal imperative around climate change that governments are rapidly prioritizing. The intervention is something that is becoming the accepted norm across many sovereigns. And what we're seeing is that if you're going to fund the sorts of interventions that are going to deliver the outcomes around the climate crisis, you need a combination of sovereign issuance and corporate bond issuance, which we've seen and has been growing over the last few years. So as for the sort of consistency of government interventions, I think this is an area where there's a growing consensus on the desirability of it. And we see the sovereign issuance as a stimulant for the market more generally. We know that we can't, as a government, fund everything necessary in terms of the investments, but we do know by putting a clear marker down, being clear about what we're investing in, we can stimulate the sort of activity that will get us to those ambitious targets and milestones in the coming years. Thank you.
And what was the stat that you cited for the sovereign issuance last year?
I think overall, globally, we saw $300 billion of issuance last year. I think that's across sovereign and corporate issuance. And then we're up to $230 billion in the first half of 2021, thereby expressing the sort of move forward and the enthusiasm that exists.
Okay. Right here and then back there.
I heard a piece of information in relation to climate change, which said that if the United States eliminated all aspects of climate change that it causes or whatever, it would have zero effect, carbon emissions essentially, zero effect on climate change. The United States, just eliminating. The world is moving forward as if climate change is a problem that we are creating. To what extent are we not creating it? Is it a natural phenomenon? And the fact that government is now moving forward, governments plural, are moving forward as if we're going to change something. If we could change everything and it affects it 2%, is it worth it?
I think your question expresses some of the skepticism, which I think is now a significant but increasingly minority view in terms of the global view on what's required. The accumulated position that we're in, due to the nature of the economic development that we've experienced across the globe, has created a challenge that needs to be dealt with. In terms of the distribution of responsibility today, we are the leaders. I'm in government now. We have got to put in the frameworks to handle it. That is demanding. To achieve a consensus across multiple types of government and democracies is also challenging. And that's why we want to use the COP process to develop as much a consensus as possible. But it will need action from all countries in all parts of the globe, and it will need innovation to deal with this at the speed that's required to avoid the sorts of damage to our natural environment that we can already, I think, be pretty clear about seeing.
One question back there, and then we'll take this one.
Yeah, thank you, Imani. My question is with respect, congratulations on the oversubscription. Do you have a sense of the geographic breakout of the sellers? I'm sorry, of the buyers. Whereabouts were they throughout the world? Was there an emphasis to have this distributed, more than just sort of the developed countries? And Imani, I think my neighbor has a question, if you permit afterwards.
I can't answer that question for you, I'm afraid. What we saw is broad and deep demand from many places, but I can't give you any accuracy around the sort of breakdown of that. Sorry.
And thank you very much for passing this opportunity over to you. Thank you so much for mentioning the consensus of the countries and the importance of bringing everyone together. Being active at the UN as part of civil society, I am accredited with Economic Social Council, and we're working on initiatives around 73, 333, environmental law. And I sit in on a lot of the delegates' conversations from my country, America, the UK, and all these others. And it seems to be that each one has their own political agenda and their own governmental agreements, and they have trouble passing through those. And being that you're part of the financial industry, that's business, and that's what they're working on, our business as well. So I was really wondering how you're going to, you mentioned COP, but I'm looking at these other activities where I'm speaking to ministers, and there's representatives often, and they've expressed their challenges.
Well, I'm not pretending to you, sat here this morning in Greenwich, that this is an easy process. It is complex, and I was in Italy last week, and I was putting pressure on my counterpart there to make a bigger commitment. We will all have different contexts in terms of the profile of the energy industry, the political context, and the challenges. But that's why the international fora that we're talking about here with COP is so important, because it is a way to stratify those high standards, to raise the bar of expectation, and to try and build as strong a consensus as possible in a way that tries to remove some of the politics around individual nations. And obviously with we've been hosting the G7 as well. It's incumbent upon us to put that on the agenda and move it forward. And what I hope is that by the time we get to the end of COP in November, you'll see more of a consensus, and those conversations that you're hearing will have more common themes and common solutions. That's where we need to get to.
I know you had a question, and I think
well, I think they said they'll have no coal-fired power stations outside of China, which is it's good progress. I mean, we've got to be positive about all steps in the right direction. But what we've also got to do is be transparent about where there are gaps, where there is more progress to be made. And as I say, I'm not here as somebody who wants to deny the reality of the challenge in terms of the transition. But we need to start reporting what those exposures are and have a pathway to that transition. That's the first step to getting to where we need to go. But China will obviously have a significant role to play, and I hope that's one that they continue to develop and strengthen in terms of their role in meeting the challenge, as all sovereign governments have to.
All right, unfortunately, we have to leave it there. It's a big topic. I think it's very important to, especially a lot of younger people who are interested in not seeing New York City underwater. Yeah, that's all the time we have for today, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure to join you. Thank you.